Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining our webinar today. My name is Sarah Clements. I'm a government affairs consultant with McGuire Woods Consulting and based in Tallahassee, Florida. We have a fantastic lineup of leaders from around the state to talk about distance learning, what Florida has learned, and how we're going to hopefully apply those lessons to the coming school year. So we have a lot to cover in a very short amount of time. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our moderator, Travis Pillow. Travis is editorial director at the Center on Reinventing Public Education based out of the University of Washington and a former Florida reporter on education. So Travis, take it away.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And it's really great to be on with so many distinguished leaders from Florida, where school districts have really jumped out to us at SERPI for the speed and thoroughness of their remote learning efforts. And we're really trying to understand a little bit better what drove that rapid response and how that can inform our preparations for fall. So for those who don't know, as Sarah mentioned, we are a think tank at the University of Washington. And basically, as soon as the pandemic started in mid-March, we really went all in on tracking remote learning efforts across the country to try to understand how our school systems are responding to this unprecedented disruption of public education. And we started that effort by tracking 82 school districts. And really right off the bat, Florida started jumping out to us. So as you can see from the far right bar on this graph, less than 1 in 5 districts that we were tracking had a comprehensive remote learning plan in place by April 3rd. But half of those that did were in the state of Florida, including all 3 of the districts represented on this call today. Eventually, the rest of the country started to catch up. So by April 21st, nearly half of the 82 districts we were tracking had a comprehensive plan in place, which we defined by the critical learning building blocks of: are you expecting teachers to deliver instruction? Are you expecting them to monitor students' academic progress? So we were looking at 82 large, mostly high-profile school districts that had the capacity to plan a complex disaster response. And to get the whole picture, we knew that we needed to look at a broader, more representative sample. And so last week, we released the results of an analysis of 477 school districts to give us a statistically representative group. And that picture was even less optimistic. So just the bottom line is just 1 in 3 districts have been communicating a clear expectation that teachers would deliver instruction to students this spring. And that dovetails with some findings from other groups. So for example, the American Enterprise Institute released a study finding 20% of districts had rigorous remote learning in place this spring. And that meant that, again, teachers would be working with students on content, students would be expected to show up and engage, and academic progress would be monitored. And so our findings and really our analysis aligns very closely with AEI's. We see a big divide between our large districts and our urban districts that have a lot of that internal capacity, and some of the rural and small town districts where you just have a smaller team and maybe marshaling a complex disaster response is more difficult. And so you see that these rural and small town school systems are less likely to be delivering instruction, less likely to be requiring teachers to track students' attendance or monitor their academic progress. And this is a sign that state level leadership is really going to be critical. It was critical this spring and will be essential as we look ahead to fall to make sure that every school district in every state really has a robust plan in place to address the learning losses that we know likely occurred this spring, and that and to make sure that every student has access to learning opportunities with a lot of just uncertainty continuing to surround the public health situation. And that begins with summer. So we've been looking at 100 school districts and 18 leading charter management organizations in terms of what their plans are to use this summer. And we found that as of 2 weeks ago, there was a real shortage of detailed plans for districts to use this summer. Basically, about half of the 100 we tracked had robust plans in place to use summer to begin addressing some of the lost learning the students might have experienced this spring. And so that's one reason why we're so interested in Florida's reopening plan that was released last week, which did begin to lay down some expectations that school districts would use July to begin addressing learning losses and helping students get a jump start on fall. And we've been really intrigued by some of the plans by districts like Duval County that have plans to either use the summer or maybe begin the school year early in July and August to start to address some of your high need groups, whether that's ELLs, whether that's students with IEPs, or whether that's students who maybe were at risk of falling behind over the spring. And so that brings us to our distinguished panelists, who I'm going to introduce one by one as we get into questions. So let's start with Jacob Oliva. He is the Chancellor of Public Schools at the Florida Department of Education. And Chancellor, we are on a call with mostly high capacity leaders of large school districts or well-regarded school organizations. And I'm curious, from the state perspective, what has your role been in making sure that every student in the state had access to instruction, even if you're looking at smaller rural communities like Union County, Highlands County, other rural and small town districts? And how do you think about that role in light of your reopening plan that's looking ahead to fall and really elevates the importance of addressing student achievement, but also leaves a lot of local discretion to school districts?
Hi, Travis. Well, thank you for that question, and thank you for the opportunity to share in this space some of the great work that we've been doing in Florida. And when we reflect back on how we asked school districts to pivot, it was right around spring break, and most of our school districts in the state of Florida are on spring break, and we were learning a lot of information about the pandemic. A lot of decisions, big decisions, were starting to be made about what's the next couple of weeks look like. That turned into the next couple of months. That turned into an even longer journey that we're in. And we asked our districts on a very short amount of time to completely pivot in the way we provided instruction and look at implementing a distance learning model. And a lot of people ask us often, how were we able to do that here in the state of Florida? And my quickest and easiest response to that is it solidifies the notion that we've got the best teachers in the nation, the best principals, the best school district leaders, and a lot of these experts that are on the panel here today will reinforce that notion, because the mindset is we got to do whatever we can to do what's right for students, to make sure that their basic needs are being met. And early on in this conversation, we were blessed with leadership from the governor's level to our commissioner that really set the tone on, as we make these plans and move forward. I remember distinctly Commissioner Corcoran talking to Superintendent saying it will be done with compassion and grace. So we know there's some waivers, we know there's some barriers, we know there's some obstacles that we're going to navigate through, but we're going to do this right, and we're going to do what's right for students. So that mantra really was the driving force that gave us the vision for how we're going to answer and ask those questions. But very early on, when we were having pandemic discussions, we were starting to have daily phone calls and webinars with school district leaders, from our county public schools to our charter school networks to our private schools, so that they can hear from us and we can hear from them when some of those challenges were. And very early on, when we were on spring break, Dade County and a few other districts that have already been doing work in instructional continuity, they've been going down this path because our schools in the state of Florida are used to being shelters and closing for natural disasters like hurricanes, and there's been some impact where districts have had to do extended periods of distance learning. So we were a little bit ahead in this landscape. But Dade County right away shared their instructional continuity plan with every district, and we started working on some collaborative networks so people can share what their best practices were, like Duval and Union and Collier and some of the districts you mentioned. And we knew that the people that needed to make the decisions, that impacted their students and what their students' needs were was going to be done at the local level. So we provided at the state level some expectations of what does attendance look like, what does grading look like, what does a day's worth of instruction look like, and put some best practices in place around a model template that districts were able to then use and meet the needs of their students where they are so that they can continue their support emotionally, academically, and even physiologically. Our schools immediately are shelters for food. They're the hub of communities, and we knew we needed to invest in our schools and give the support and resources to our districts to make sure that the basic needs of our students were able to be met.
Great. And so let's turn to some of those district leaders. We have here Dr. Daryl Diamond, the Director of Innovative Learning at Broward County Public Schools. We have Marianne Simon, the Regional Superintendent for Elementary Schools in Duval County, and Robert Bixler, the Associate Superintendent of Curriculum and Digital Learning in Orange County. And all of these districts were able to roll out district learning really quickly, and I'm trying to think through how that strong effort can inform preparation for fall. And so I'm really hoping to hear from our district leaders. How do you all plan to deal with equity in issues like attendance or grading, where there's this balance you have to strike between, high expectations for all students with sort of acknowledging that even as we look into the fall, there's going to be a lot of disruptions that families are dealing with, and it much really depends on the different public health scenarios in terms of how much time students will be spending together in buildings, and then also thinking about the non-academic needs of your students. So how does the importance of trauma-informed instruction really factor into your planning? And I'd like to take our district leaders sort of in alphabetical order by district, so starting with Dr. Diamond and then moving to Duval and Orange.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you for allowing Broward to represent some of the work that we've done here during the pandemic. Here in Broward, there are some critical success factors that we're going to be monitoring as we deal with equity in attendance and grading so that we have high expectations for all students. And we recognize that there are students that have unique needs that have to be addressed. Our approach will need to be very flexible and agile as we reopen up the schools. We need to ensure that there is protected, uninterrupted teaching and learning time for all students. The ability to personalize the learning experience and differentiate the instruction based on student needs is important, and we need to be able to train teachers to be able to do that at a distance. We need to make sure that there's access to devices, reliable connectivity, and content that's recorded for access anytime, anywhere. Our teachers and students are well trained on technology platforms with standardized guidelines that promote effective and consistent use of all of the features that are inherent in those technology platforms. We need to make sure that there's an availability of feedback mechanisms to our parents and to our students that are embedded in these technology platforms. And we're going to monitor the attendance of our students through either our LMS or our district sign-on, single sign-on functionality. But we need to be very flexible in regard to attendance and student submission of work. Many of our high school students in particular now are the breadwinners for their families, and we need to have some grace and compassion in how we move forward. We recognize that a good percent of our students are going to need to receive additional time and attention due to the COVID slide, which is compounded now by the summer slide. I think this pandemic has highlighted all of the inequities that exist in our social system and the social emotional toll that it's taken on a good portion of our students. Broward specifically has been dealing with trauma and its aftermath ever since our Parkland tragedy. And we do have some built-in mechanisms that enable us to continue the work that we have been doing relating to trauma on our students. This will help us build our daily delivery of instruction through various programs that we've developed and delivered to heal our district. There are many of our students where school is their social safety net, and we need to recognize this and incorporate strategies to monitor and evaluate the effects of the pandemic and its isolation for many of our students, staff, and families.
Thank you. And this is, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Marianne Simon.
Yes, this is Marianne from Duval County. Thank you for having us here today to also share some of our successes here in Duval County. I wanted to start just by talking about some of the things that did make it so successful for us, because we'll need to continue those things as we move into the fall. One of the biggest things is that we did already have an infrastructure built that allowed us to switch to a virtual platform pretty quickly. We had the student devices in our schools, with a lot of our schools having a 1-to-1 ratio, so that we were able to gather those laptops and get those out to our students. And that was a big feat in itself. We had 7 sites set up for our parents to drive through and pick up laptops for their students. And then those without transportation, we were able to have a delivery to their homes by some of our social workers and some of our other volunteers at our in our district. And so all of our students were able to get their devices. We already had a system for hotspots, free hotspots for our high school students that had rolled out prior to the pandemic. And so then we just had to provide those for our middle and elementary students that were in need. And then most importantly, one of the biggest successes was that we were already familiar with using Microsoft Teams as a platform in our district. Our teachers were very comfortable with using Teams. And so when academic services met to put together our instructional plan for virtual learning, they just set it up through Microsoft Teams in a way that resembled what teachers and students were already used to. So when we switched over, the only difference was that they were doing it at home and on a computer. Attendance was something that we anticipated being a large issue for us, as that is something that we struggle with without the pandemic. And so we created teams at each school to make daily phone calls to our students. That was all students, not just those who were not showing up, but we did what we called a wellness check to every family every day throughout the spring. And we will plan to continue to do that into the fall. Schools that could not connect with families during those phone calls, of course, we have issues with connecting due to disconnected phones and so forth. We had a system in place and will continue to have a system in place to go to the home, whether that's one of our social workers going out to the home or someone else from our district level being sent out, just to make sure that we're able to engage every student in our county in whichever program we decide to go with in the fall. Communication was huge. Our online platform was called Duval Homeroom, and it was all set up again in Teams. And through this, we were able to communicate with parents, teachers, and students. So having everything in one location was very helpful for all of our constituents to be able to go to that one spot. And we will continue to utilize that as we move forward in the fall. The final piece, expectations for students and grading. The way we looked at it is we had the same expectations for students during this time as we did while we were in school. So high expectations for all, and our district working hard to make sure that the students were provided everything they needed to meet those expectations. Teachers provided feedback and grades on assignments just like they would have done in school setting. And students received remediation virtually, and they were able to complete grade recovery if they missed any of their work. One of the other benefits of Duval Homeroom was that our parents were at home with a lot of our students while they were doing the work.
So we were really able to engage a lot of our parents into what their students were learning and doing in school, which was a huge benefit. The social emotional piece, through the pandemic and being at home in the spring, we did what we called Wellness Wednesdays, where our students were receiving that social emotional curriculum virtually. And then as we move into the fall, we are proposing a post-pandemic support plan for all of our schools to utilize, and this will include information for how the adults react to the pandemic and supports that they may need. It provides classroom supports to the teachers to use with their students, and then it will also provide resources for group and small individual counseling through our social workers and full service school counselors. And so that plan will be presented to our faculty and staff as we move into the fall.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Rob Bixler from Orange County Public Schools. A lot of what's been shared, I don't want to repeat, but I think it's helpful to understand how Orange County was prepared to scale up so quickly. For us, we had the benefit of having our LaunchDead program, which is our one-to-one initiative also. And so this year, all of our middle and high school students had one-to-one devices, and several of our schools have had one-to-one devices for several years. So we're in our 6th year of our LaunchDead program. We added one elementary cohort this year, and we're adding the other 2 coming up actually for next year. Those devices, elementary, didn't go home, but our middle school and high school students carry those back and forth every day. So the idea of online resources and an LMS and a single sign-on, most of our district has been used to because we've had that available for several years. So when we made the very quick switch to distance learning, for us, I heard a couple of the presenters talk about this. We had a lot of things in place. We had to coalesce it into one location for parents. So I think one of the highlights for us that we still talk about is in that extended spring break week, we called it an enrichment week in Orange County. We had over 230 training sessions with about 14,000 participants, which basically was gearing us up for that distance learning trek to the end of the school year, not knowing that it was going to be 1 week or 2 weeks, and ended up being, as Mr. Oliva said, several months. So for us, that was a big part of our success. I will say, we learned a lot. I think professional development is something that we can always do better at, and we received a lot of feedback from our classroom teachers and administrative staff on additional feedback or additional training that we needed to do. And we would have office hours, especially from my staff, who would continue to do continual feedback and continual professional development throughout the course of those 9 weeks. After a while, we learned that some of our classroom teachers would give some of the best professional development around, and so we basically recruited them to do district-wide professional development on how they were integrating technology for distance learning via, through video conferencing or through other measures. So, I think for us, that was one of the keys to success that kept us moving along. I will agree, attendance continues to be, one of the issues we had to deal with wellness checks and making sure we could keep in contact with our students. By any means necessary, phone calls, recorded sessions, just to make sure they checked in, doing attendance, doing lessons. We had high expectations as well. We still expected attendance and assignments to be turned in. Obviously, I think Mr. Oliva mentioned the word compassion. That was one of our guiding philosophies. So we have to be compassionate during these times because, as we all know, students are home with their parents who are trying to, sometimes do their job and also help their students while they're at home. And some of our families have more than one student at home trying to do work. I laugh. I shared this statistic at the end when we did up all of our wrap-up about assignments being turned in. And when it was all said and done, because we have a LMS and we have a system that we use for our LMS system, we had 13 million assignments turned in over those 9 weeks. So learning didn't stop. We had almost 230,000 virtual sessions going on those 9 weeks. So we had to quickly shift, but our numbers showed that education and learning still took place. SEL is a big factor for us as well. When we return, and it has been last year, but this year returning obviously takes a much greater emphasis. We will be having an entire plan around SEL and social emotional learning where all of the divisions will be participating in this when we return. And that'll be a major focus for us. We're calling it social emotional learning and leadership. Principals, assistant principals, my department will be participating, all the departments participating, in making sure that our faculty, our staff, our students, our families can transition back into the school and be successful. Learning gaps, of course. Obviously, the Florida Recovery Plan lays out some very, very important ways to address our early childhood, our students that have the most needs, and that's what we're working on as well, getting prepared for this July, potential July support for some summer support, and then leading into the brand new school year.
Great. And so we also have with us Dr. Jennifer Brown, the Executive Director of KIPP Jacksonville. And Dr. Brown, you work predominantly with a low-income student population in Northwest Jacksonville. And so I'm curious, as you reflect on this spring, if there were any barriers you saw in meeting the needs of your students and families remotely that you think policymakers, district leaders should factor into their planning as they look ahead to fall.
Absolutely. Thank you, Travis, and good afternoon to everyone. So just for context, 98% of our students are Black, and we are CEP certified. The community eligibility provision allows for 100% of our students to receive free breakfast, lunch, and an afternoon snack. Additionally, we provide transportation. 75%, maybe a little higher than that, of our students actually ride our buses to get to campus. And so I think that that's just helpful context to frame what our immediate concerns were about pivoting to a remote learning or a digital learning model. I think I'd probably characterize them as, trauma, safety, health, and accessibility. So the nutrition of students, many of them whom rely on meals at school. So when school is closed, the implications of that for those students and their families is pretty significant. And our campus is located in a food desert currently. There's been some progress locally in changing that, but during the COVID-19 pandemic, that was still the reality. And so that was one of our immediate thoughts, was how will the children eat? And fortunately, we're part of Duval County, and Duval County Public Schools approached this, and I think in a very compassionate way, and provided meals daily for all children in the county, ages 5 through 18. And so our families were able, our students were definitely able to be a part of that. And so I think there are some implications there around just how much the social services schools actually shoulder in cities across the country. So that was the physical part. Specifically around the nutrition was certainly a concern. I'd say the trauma, we have had a partnership with the Children's Home Society for the past 4 years. We've had mental health therapists embedded in our schools because of the trauma that our students would come to school with. And there were immediate concerns around just their safety, being in home environments that offered a range of, lack of safety for those students. So we were worried about that, and how could we continue to provide the support of those mental health therapists and those counselors when those interactions would have to transform into something either virtual or over the phone. And how, so one concern was how could we continue with that in an effective way? I'd say accessibility. We quickly had to survey how many of our families had devices at home, and we had to be really specific. The phone does count as a device, but not in as much as the parent is using it regularly during the day. So we had to make sure that students had access to devices where they could actually log in, complete assignments, and participate in lessons with the teachers, both synchronous and asynchronous learning. And then there was the question around connectivity. Did families have access to the internet in the first place? So Travis, I think if I were ranking, right, I think in the year 2020, we have to look at ourselves and acknowledge, admit, advocate that every family has to have, every household has to have internet access. It's just a must-have at this point in history. We just have to have it. And there was a small percentage of our families who did not have internet capability, a larger percentage who didn't have a device at home, and we were able to distribute devices so that we could, continue with learning, as panelists have said before. But that, I think, is just a major problem, and being part of a national network of schools, I've heard that from several of my peers around the country. We were shocked, disappointed, anew at the number of families who just don't have this, what should at this point, be a given in most households. So I think that there's something there for policymakers. How do we really push to ensure that every family has this? It's so important these days. I think I'll end with health. So, our students' communities are disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. And so the immediate response was, the protection of their well-being. And the same is true for our talent population, those with pre-existing conditions, those who were high risk based on, reports that were coming out from the CDC, from state officials. We had to think about the safety of students. So even, we were on spring break when buildings got closed. So we didn't get to see our students again and had to do what so many districts did around the state, including Duval County, was arrange for distribution of the technology. And to take into consideration, folks were scared. They were afraid to come out. There was so much that we did not know about the impact of this virus. And, watching what was happening internationally, it's easy to understand why there was fear. So I think about that going forward. I know we're going to talk about that, the future, a little bit later, but we needed to make sure that our response was respectful of folks' justifiable fear about the impact of this pandemic, of this deadly virus. And I think that there's something there too. I don't know what it is exactly, what might be instructive for policymakers, but maybe community health care clinics. I don't know the percentage of our students' families who don't have access to quality health care, but there's something around that. We've got medical vans, dental vans, vision vans that come to our schools frequently throughout the year. And I just wonder about the access to quality health care in the communities where my students live.
Great, and that gives us a lot to think about. And so I also wanted to turn over to Sam Verghese. He is the Chief Operations Officer at Florida Virtual School. And Sam, we're wondering, as a statewide virtual operation, you are in some ways sort of constituted as a school district, but in another way, you are at FLVS a service provider to the other traditional school districts all over the state. And so I'm wondering, how has your working relationship with school districts changed during this switch to remote learning, and are you thinking about new types of partnership as you look ahead to fall?
Yeah, Travis, thanks so much for that question. It's really good to be here and be a part of this discussion. As having a chance to be here at Florida Virtual during this time, it's really been a enlightening opportunity to be able to use a situation that creates so much difficulty and stress, to use it not to run in fear, but to use that to create some positive action. And I think that's really, to your point, something that I've definitely seen happen. I think knowing, as you mentioned, we've been involved in this virtual education space for the last 22 years, and being one of the first choice programs in the state of Florida, definitely having an opportunity to really use the best practices that we've seen to be able to provide as much of that, I say, for free and out there during the COVID time that we had been in. Just to highlight a couple examples for you, we had an opportunity when we came into this. We knew there was going to be a need for teachers who had not taught in a virtual space to start gaining an understanding in these things, and to start having that learning curve advance as much as possible. I know you've heard some of the districts earlier talk about how they were at the front of that curve trying to anticipate this before COVID. There were some districts that had not really anticipated that. And by nature of that, what we were able to do was offer virtual teacher training for several thousand teachers in Florida to help them as they were trying to piece together what this was going to look like as they were going to transition to this online learning space. And that was a great opportunity to really bridge that gap as we continue to talk about how the education system is set up. Really, we are one of those four vital components, along with the public K-12 school system, public post-secondary, and of course the Florida School for the Deaf and Blind is mentioned in statute as one of those components as well. And Travis, I think what is helpful to know that in Florida, I believe there's an understanding of all Floridians that the Florida educational system is going to work seamlessly together to best meet the needs of the students. And, as much as the student is going to be at the center of every decision we make at Florida Virtual, I also know that's the case for our K-12 system, across the state. And I think that was an opportunity for us to say, let's not hold best ideas close. Let's disseminate it out there, what it looks like to transition into this environment, not just for educators, but also for parents and for students. So something else that we did is we provided what we called an online learning community on our website, which was also going to provide resources for educators and parents that were going to help in that transition. Along with, we were offering digital courses for free, which is actually still going on for the short term here as we get through the summer. And the idea was that we wanted to help people during this time to experience as much of a sense of community in this, so that parents could be able to say, I'm not alone in this. And even me myself, having kids who are in our Flex program at Florida Virtual, is just the idea that this is a daunting task if someone hasn't undertaken it, not just on the education side as an educator, but also when it comes to a parent trying to figure out, how do I do this? How do I make this work when rubber meets the road? How do I juggle work and educating my kid at the same time? How do I engage with the teacher in this sense? So that was what we did in providing that community, to help provide as much continuity as possible when it comes to a knowledge base, when it comes to understanding, so that a community could feel like there is a common understanding as much as we could in an ever-changing arena like this. So what we also did, in working with, of course, Chancellor Oliva's on the line at DOE, we also were able to help get our server capacity up to support up to 4 million students, depending on what the need was going to be. Thankfully, we didn't get to that point where it needed to be to that level, but we just wanted to be ready. We're also ready as a safety net if for some reason this COVID situation continues beyond the summer, which time will tell with all that. So that's a lot, Travis, to answer that question when it comes to the districts and those relationships on that front. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and that, I think, tees up a question for our district leaders, which I'm keeping an eye on time, and so I'm wondering if y'all could please keep your answers to about a minute each. But I'm wondering, for our district leaders, the fact that each of the districts on this call and most school districts across Florida operate their own virtual schools, oftentimes using FLVS technology that they operate as a franchise. And the fact that you have in-house teachers who are teaching classes virtually and the ability to serve students through your own virtual programs that you operate, how does that, or does that factor at all into your planning for fall? And we can take that again sort of in the alphabetical order by district.
So this is Daryl Diamond from Broward. Broward Virtual School has provided online instruction for our students grades K through 12 for a couple of decades now. I think it started in 2001. It's always an option for any of our students, either as a full-time student or a part-time student. We believe that many parents will see this as a viable alternative to returning physically to their home school, predominantly because of the reputation that Broward Virtual School has earned in terms of the training and support that it has delivered to their teaching staff and what their teaching staff is able to accomplish with our students. But I think we need to recognize that not all students are able to be successful in a totally online virtual space. And if they become a student of the virtual school, in many instances, many of the after-school options that are provided by their home school, they won't have access to. So what we're trying to do here in Broward is to work with our home schools to create a distance learning option for students who want to remain home 100% until the pandemic is over, but also remain associated with their home school and the activities that it provides. This is going to require professional development for the instructional staff to be able to deliver instruction at a distance in this manner that would be commensurate with what a student would be able to get in a face-to-face environment. Questions like how can a teacher integrate their face-to-face instruction with students who are opting to remain at home? What skills does a teacher need to be able to maneuver both learning environments in a way that's conducive to the students who are at home as well as the students who will be in the building? And this would truly be that true hybrid model where a teacher is working with both types of students simultaneously. So in Broward, we're now and our teachers to determine who wants which type of teaching and learning environment so we can begin planning and training based on their responses.
And this is Marianne, Simon, and Duval. I think our answer is very similar. Duval Virtual, we do plan on using that much the same way that we have in the past. We do expect enrollment to increase just due to how comfortable parents may or may not be with returning to school and what our options might be. So we will have to work closely with them on additional teaching staff to answer to their increased enrollment and then how that might affect our brick and mortar schools on their staffing as well. We're currently working on our reopening plan as well, and one of our options is to continue to use Duval Homeroom in the way that we have since the spring for those families who may be, again, uncomfortable about returning. And if there's a need as we progress into the fall about having to go all virtual due to any future outbreaks, hopefully not, but that possibility, we need to plan for that as well. The benefits we think for having that Duval homeroom option would be, of course, the continuity of their teachers, the curriculum that we're using in our everyday schools, and then that more day-to-day teacher contact for our more fragile students. I think a little difference that we have in Duval than Broward is we would have this Duval homeroom as a separate option than the face-to-face. So we would have teachers who would strictly be doing Duval homeroom, and then other teachers who would be strictly doing the face-to-face instruction.
This is Rob from Orange County. For us, we advocate for virtual as an option. We have all along. I will say, we have seen an uptick in informational sessions as well, as parents have to make choices between now and the start of school, whether or not they feel comfortable coming back, if that's the route that we all take, or if they prefer virtual. So we champion that as well. We believe in choice, and so we have a great relationship. I work a lot with the Associate Superintendent for School Choice. So a lot of the same things my colleagues shared, the same for us. While we have not, we're still in the fact-finding, trying to decide what our plans will look like when we open. We wholeheartedly support our virtual program here.
Great. And so I want to look ahead toward the fall a little more and start with Chancellor Oliva. The reopening plan released last week calls for setting aside some funds in the CARES Act to help districts with the planning process for this fall. And I'm wondering, as you look even out into the longer term, do you have any hopes for how the response to this crisis will help districts change the way they operate, change the way they think about planning for future disasters, and maybe building a more resilient system for supporting students and families down the line?
Hi, Travis. Yes, thank you for that question. And I think the answer to that question is still an ongoing discussion, because what schools are figuring out now is, what is that new norm? Is there a new choice option for families in this hybrid blended learning model? Is there future policy recommendations that we might need to pursue on how we historically fund and collect seat time and award credits and grades and in a distant learning environment? Is that different than a virtual learning environment, which is different than a face-to-face environment? So the document that you're referring to in the CARES set aside, we did put some dollars aside to invest and continue working with school districts as we map out what does instructional continuity look like, what does professional development look like, and what does that system of care we heard a little bit of conversations around look like in supporting students in an environment that is not what we were used to back in January. And when we look at the survey data, we've been putting out surveys, and the districts on here are all been collaborative partners and sharing information from surveys that they send out asking parents where they are with how do they want students to return to school. It's almost consistently broken into thirds. A third of the families are saying they're not comfortable sending their child back to a traditional school setting until there's a vaccine or a cure. A third of the families are saying we're ready to send them back as soon as you open. Our kids they need to be in that environment, and we want to put them in that environment. And about a third of our families are still undecided. And I think as Florida's reopening and we have different counties and different places, those school districts are working on developing those plans locally to make sure that the parents, A, feel safe that their student is coming back into the right learning environment for them, and B, they can do anything they can to close achievement gaps, mitigate learning loss, and meet the learner where they are to continue the high quality expectations that we have for all of Florida students. And Travis, I'd be remiss to not share that we have posted on our website, if you just go to fldoe.org, there's a page for our COVID-19 response where every single webinar, every single memo, every single technical assistance, emergency orders that have been signed and updated, it's almost a following timeline. We post that and we share that, and we want to be transparent. And I go back to the opening remarks. We've been successful in Florida because of the great folks that are on this call that have also opened up their doors and are transparent and sharing and doing what they can to meet the needs of our students.
Great, and that's I think a great segue into turning it over to some questions from our audience and from our participants. And so for that, I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah.
Thank you, Travis, and thank you to all of our speakers who've got a few questions. I've got a few in the queue. If you've got a question for our speakers, please go ahead and type that out, and we'll try to answer these as many as we can in the time that we have left. We did get a question earlier about how districts and schools are providing appropriate training to teachers and staff given the quick scale-up, and noted that in some districts, and maybe perhaps other states, there was not any additional training. So was there specific training that you all did for your teachers in order to help them once it was clear that we were going to be doing distance learning?
So this is Daryl from Broward. We have our Canvas learning management system. Prior to us closing our doors, I would say that about 56% of our teachers had published courses. By the time everybody came back to work after spring break, we were up to 98%. So there was a lot of ongoing webinars and workshops that we delivered on a daily basis, multiple times a day, on specifically how do you get started with Canvas, how do you enhance your Canvas course, how do you use Teams as a web conferencing tool. As the weeks progressed from March 13th to the end of the school year, we developed more advanced workshops where teachers would actually, we called them workshops because the teachers would actually bring their work to the webinar, and we would show them and identify techniques and tools that they could use, and then we would give them an opportunity to actually do that work while they were with us and get our expert to help them as they were going through it. We are continuing that over the summer with a variety of different webinars and workshops. I think that that was significant in ensuring that we had a baseline for all teachers to deliver instruction, and students were able to participate in the learning activities that the teachers were putting out.
This is Marianne in Duval. Something similar. In our use of Microsoft Teams, we did all of our teacher training that Friday before students returned. Again, they were comfortable with Teams, but we introduced the instructional plan that they were going to be following for delivery of instruction to their students. And then throughout the entire spring, our academic services provided online support for teachers. And then we had specialists who joined on the teachers' team pages and could do some co-teaching and troubleshooting with the teachers live with their students. But I think one of the most powerful professional developments we had were teachers training each other. And so we really honed in on those teachers who were doing excellent things online and had them do tutorials for other teachers. And we highlighted those on Fridays throughout. So yeah, we had lots of training opportunities for our teachers, but they were mostly learning from one another.
And this is Rob from Orange County. Very similar. We, again, like I said, we kicked off the huge training to get prepared the week prior to going distance learning. Then throughout the entire 9 weeks, we had multiple sessions, and because I oversee VPK through 12 curriculum and digital learning, we had digital platform training like the Canvas or the Launchpad LMS, or other, systems. But we also had my content teachers, math, ELA, science, social studies, elementary, middle, and high school, who also did trainings, and they're versed in the digital tools as well. So it was content focused on how to integrate into your classroom, and systems focused how to use the actual system. So that was ongoing throughout the year. We also brought in other departments from ELL, ESE, guidance services. We brought in many departments, and we trained them who could also go back out and work with their staff. So PD probably was the most successful thing we did to help us bridge that transition so quickly.
Thank you all. Another question we have is about the, quote, online penalty. as far as when students move to online learning, did we see a segment of the population suffer more than others, such as low-income students? I think we know the answer to that is going to be yes, but I would love if any of the districts have any kind of data at their fingertips, or if they could just share a little bit more on the specifics on the difference they have seen in different segments of their student population.
So this is Daryl from Broward. We did take daily attendance through our single sign-on, so we were able to identify which students were logging into the system. We were able to, through our teachers, determine which students were participating. But as we said before, there's no doubt that there was a segment of our population, for a multitude of different reasons, were not engaged. And that's what we are struggling with now to correct, so that we have built-in supports that can, first of all, identify those students and then work with those students and families as we reopen schools. I would say that in terms of attendance taking, we were at 89 to 92% attendance throughout. Given on a given day, it would be different, but it was that 89 to 92%. But again, for us now, it's to determine the level of engagement of our students with the work, with their teachers, with each other as we move forward.
Thank you. All right, I think we've got time for maybe one more question. We have a question on the transition for those students who are in high school who would normally be doing college visits or may have college fairs or looking at all the different options for post-secondary. Do you all see a change in that, or have you been working with the post-secondary partners to kind of think about how you'll provide those opportunities for your students?
This is Jen from KIPP Jacksonville. So a component of our model is KIPP through college. And that team focuses specifically on ensuring that our students are getting to and through college. And what we were able to leverage, we have over 90 college partners across the KIPP network. We were able to leverage the resources and the power of our local college partners to do virtual tours, partnering with them to do virtual tours, webinars where our KIPP through College team was present along with representatives from those college partners to answer students' questions about the matriculating to college and what the transition entailed. So honestly, we just tried to take advantage of the resources that were available to us. And which, in an effort to just not preclude students from participating in anything, in any form, and just made the best of what was available.
This is Rob from Orange County. I think the line make the best of what's available really is telling. And so, I think what occurred through this was some of the creativity that didn't stop things from happening. We just found a different way to do it. And she just shared how the colleges were able to do virtual tours. I mean, we had the Orlando Ballet do live lessons via web conferencing to our students. We recorded it and we sent it out, to the entire district. And so I think all of us and our organizational partners found creative ways to continue the academic, services that they've been providing because they wanted education to continue. And so, although none of us want to be in this situation, I think the creativity of all of us, and I mean all of us, globally here, some of the things that I was able to witness and see, it truly amazed me.
Well said. I agree.
Well, that takes us to our time. I wish we had more time. We had some other really great questions that we could have gotten to. I did want to reiterate that the reopening plan that Chancellor Oliva mentioned, you can access that on the Florida Department of Education's website. It's fldoe.org. In fact, some of the questions that we have here are asking things that that you may see addressed in that reopening plan. Of course, those are guidelines for districts to do what they feel is best. But again, thank you all so much. This webinar is being recorded, so we will send that link out for anyone who missed parts of it. And we appreciate you being on. Have a great day.